My name is Elizabeth Wally. I'm a horticulture educator in the Madison Monroe St. Clair unit. And though I'm a horticulturalist, my area of expertise is commercial fruit and vegetable production. And today I will be talking about apples, specifically decisions on making cultivar and rootstock selections. So we'll go ahead and move through the afternoon and talk about some of the considerations before you make those choices. And we'll have plenty of time to have a discussion afterwards if some questions come up that weren't answered during the session. So in looking at the title slide, I've got a couple of pictures here just to kind of identify pictures as we go along. The picture on the left of the beautiful pink bloom is actually the bloom on a B9 rootstock, or a bud 9 also is a name. You wouldn't normally get to see the flowers because usually something is grafted on top of the rootstock. So this is just an opportunity to show you that rootstocks for apples are apples themselves as well, and if nothing is grafted onto them, they flower and fruit just like an apple, though they were bred for specific qualities rather than for their eating quality. And on the right-hand side is just a beautiful picture of firm gold apples. So I'll try and identify the pictures if they don't have little titles underneath of them as we go along. You know, if you're considering planting apples, and that's whether you're, planting a small orchard or whether you're going in a larger direction, or even if you just have a couple of trees in your backyard, we usually have several components of the actual orchard system. And so I have an apple fruit here on all the components that go into producing a quality fruit. And you see one of the interlocking pieces is the rootstock. So if you look at the whole overall apple as being the cultivar, one of the pieces is the rootstock. And so that's one of the components. So we'll talk about cultivar characteristics, and then we'll also talk about rootstock characteristics, and also talk about where you can buy some of these things, whether you're buying it on the retail market or whether you're able to buy on the wholesale market. We'll kind of touch on all of those little pieces. So when you're thinking about planning an apple planting, there are many cultivars available, and every one of them has its negatives and its positives. There's none that is an absolute silver bullet. They all have something about them that is a plus or a minus. When you're planting, you really need to think about time of ripening, because we have apples that we call summer apples, which are much earlier, and then we have the fall apples as well. So if you're looking to plant these for a commercial market, you really need to think about the marketing, and that includes people's mindsets on when they're expecting apples to be available. You also need to think about harvest labor requirements. Some apples require more work than others, particularly depending on what type of rootstock. The smaller the rootstock, usually the more management that's involved in them. So usually when I'm talking about planting an apple planting, we usually recommend that you should plant 10 to 30 cultivars. And again, I'm talking about a commercial planting. And that's so that you can ensure not only seasonality in terms of maturity, but also that you can have good cross-pollination with the appropriate pollinating pairs in apples. There are about 6,000 named varieties in apples, and we definitely won't be talking about all of them today. I'm really going to talk about characteristics so that when you're looking for an apple, you can kind of do a little bit of research to see if they have the characteristic that you want or one that maybe you don't want. And so when we're looking at planting those 10 to 20 apples, what we're looking for is that about 20% of them probably should be early season. That's just the beginning of the apple season. And some example of apples that are considered early season would be what I have listed here. Things like Pristine, Zestar, Gala, and Ginger Gold. And then another 30% should be a little bit later, which we call mid-season, which would fall in September. And that's when your Honeycrisp, Jonagold, Jonathan, Crimson Crisp would come in that window. And then the big window, when most people are expecting apples to come in, and you no longer have a lot of the other fruits on the market, like peaches, would be in October, and that's when you're getting into what we call our fall apples or our late season apples. So those are the Fujis, the Braeburns, Golden Delicious, Suncrisp, Gold Rush, things like that. And so when you look at that mix, that's probably one of your first ones is selecting apples in those particular windows so that you're not overloaded in one particular area. When we're looking at apple characteristics, we also need to keep in mind where we're located. So if I just use Illinois specifically, it's a very long state, and in general there are differences in the types of apples that are grown in the northern part of the state as compared to the southern part of the state. And one of the issues that I'm going to key in on are heat-related issues. And usually we have certain apples that, although the tree itself is very hardy and grows well throughout the state, fruit quality can be an issue when temperatures are very high. And usually as you're moving south in the state is where you get ever-increasing problems with heat on certain varieties. And so when we're looking at this list here, this list either has problems with the quality of the fruit is, soft or kind of, just mushy. It doesn't have that nice crisp quality that you want. And we really look at McIntosh and its offspring having those types of problems. When you grow them in the northern part of the state, things like Cortland, Empire, McCown, all of those are very well adapted to a cooler climate. So that's where they have very good color development and very good texture on them. So they're nice and crisp. Whereas if you grow them to the southern part of the state, St. Louis and south, you start getting a loss in quality, even though the tree will grow very well. There are other apples like Jonagold that will drop, and McIntosh is another one too in hot temperatures. So all of these have something that is less desirable in the warmer climates of southern Illinois. And so for the most part, these will be ones that if you're not going to spend money on droppers with chemicals to keep them on the tree, these are probably ones that you would want to shy away from unless you just have such a strong market for sales that you would consider them. Also need to think about things like the management, and one of them is how difficult they are to get a uniform crop from year to year. We have certain apples. In general, apples have a tendency to be biennial, meaning that they have a heavier crop one year and then the next year a very light crop. And when we're talking about commercial growers or someone that relies on a good yield every year, we have to keep in mind that there are some that have a very strong biennial tendency, meaning it is very difficult to break it. And one I have listed here strongly is Red Delicious, Honeycrisp, Jonagold, Fuji, Northern Spy, Paul Red. All of these are very challenging to not only thin them, but also to get them to have a nice uniform crop from year to year to year. Some that are somewhat moderate in that level would be Golden Delicious, Ginger Gold, McIntosh, Empire, Braeburn. And again, I'm just giving you examples of some of these, but the ones that I'm listing are probably the ones that are more well known for having these characteristics. So again, when you're selecting these varieties, you need to keep in mind that you're going to really need to be on top of thinning. You'll need to be aggressive to keep them to have a uniform crop from year to year to year. Otherwise, you'll have a heavy crop, light crop, heavy crop, light crop. And somewhat related to that is how difficult they are to thin. And you can kind of see some similarities. You see the Fuji and Golden Delicious were on my previous list. So when we're looking at relying on chemical thinning for apple trees, and again, that's whether you're using hormones or whether you're using Sevin, the insecticide, regardless, there are some varieties that are just very difficult to chemical thin, and there has to be a stronger reliance on hand thinning. And I mentioned this, that if any of you are listening, get to the level where it is beyond your single capability to do the thinning that you might actually have to have additional labor to do some hand thinning if you're not able to succeed with chemical thinning. And so those that are notoriously difficult to chemical thin include the Fuji's, the Golden Delicious, the Lodi, Rome, and Wealthies. Those that are considered intermediate, again, you need to be somewhat aggressive with these. And when I mean aggressive, that usually means starting very early, and that would be at petal fall. And so Jersey Mac, Paula Red, Spartan, the Spur type Delicious, all of these are somewhat difficult, but more in the intermediate range. Then you get into those that are very easy. That way it gives you a little bit of work room. You don't have to be right on top of them at petal fall. You can actually have small fruit and fairly easily do chemical thinning on these, and so that you can use things that are considered not as aggressive. So something like 7 insecticide would work for these. So Braeburn, Cortland, Empire, Gala, you see the list there. All of these are considered fairly easy to thin. The picture that I have here is what you would expect to see from chemical thinning. And so you see a cluster of apples here that has had chemical thinner. And if memory serves, this was a hormone that was put on, I believe, the first application. And after about a week's time, what you start seeing is that 2 of the smaller fruit have ceased in their growing, and they're actually starting to dry up and die. And the central one, the king bloom in this particular case, or the king fruit, is continuing to grow. So this is one of the signs that you see chemical thinning would be visible. And so on this particular case, those would drop off. Some of the other apple characteristics are, I would say for the most part, most apples are diploid. That means that they have 2 sets of chromosomes. But there is another set that are triploid. So when we're looking at triploid, those are usually considered very large fruited. But coming along with that is that most of them are either sterile or only partially fruitful, meaning that you don't have good pollination, fertilization with these types without having 2 additional fruit cultivars to match with them. And so in addition to that, the triploid type usually have a lower number of viable flowers compared to the normal diploid trees. And so when we're looking at these, as I say, what is required for you to get complete pollination and fertilization for a triploid tree is that you have to have 2 additional different cultivars to complete the process. So because the triploid is pollen sterile, it can't pollinate anything. And so you need 1 tree that has overlapping bloom to pollinate the triploid, but you need another tree to pollinate the pollinizer itself. And so with that one, you need a few more trees just to have it. So when we're looking at those types of, I have a list. Probably the most famous or the most well-known out of that group would be Mutsu, which is also known as Crispin. The picture here I didn't have a good picture, a nice clean picture. I took a picture of a beautiful Mutsu, but it is infected by city blotch fly speck. So a good Mutsu would not have that on there usually. But you can see some of the other cultivars that are triploid, and so these have a tendency to be overall larger anatomy, but in particular the fruit. Now going back to the diploid type, there are also what we call small fruited cultivars, and so in general they just produce small fruit, and no matter how good a manager you are, they just in general are small fruited. And so I have Gala, Jonathan, Empire, Red Free, Liberty. Now if you're doing an operation where you're doing something like candied apples or things like that, a lot of times a smaller apple suitable, or if you're doing things with young children and providing apples, small apples are good. So there is some benefit to knowing which ones are small as well as which ones are large. There are a number of scab-resistant varieties. And so if you follow these in order, it kind of matches the picture. So the number one that I have here is pristine, and so you can match it up to the bright yellow apple. Most of the scab-resistant apples are either red or yellow with a strong blush on them. Pristine is one of the few that is a good solid yellow apple. And I believe that I used Golden Delicious as my baseline here, and so when you see the numbers here, if you use Golden Delicious as the 0 point, pristine would come in about 74 days before Golden Delicious. And if I put an FB after it, that means that it is fire blight prone. That means that even though it has scab resistant, it is susceptible to fire blight as well. So just because it's scab resistant does not mean that it's fire blight resistant too. And usually there are a couple of other diseases that some of these may have resistance or susceptibility to. And usually what is listed is either powdery mildew or rust. And so these all have varying degrees of either susceptibility or resistance to powdery mildew or rust. But I think the most important things to know about these, because scab is such a serious problem and fire blight is such a serious problem, those are the two that I mentioned in this particular slide. One of the comments that I made on Enterprise, again, I don't really consider this a good fresh eating apple, and sometimes that's a consideration that you need to make on your market as well, as to whether you are growing them for making pies or processing in some way, or if your entire market is for fresh market. And Enterprise is a good example of one that I do not consider good for a fresh market, because you can chew and chew and chew and the skin just never goes away. And so it's one that is more suited to if you're going to process, because it does taste very good, just not for fresh market. If we move on and talk a little bit more about disease resistant, I'm going to focus in a little bit more about fire blight. I mentioned those that are blight susceptible in the scab resistant group, but there are others outside of that group that are very susceptible to fire blight. And I mention this as a challenge because much of Illinois has issues with fire blight, and so it's always good going into buying your trees so that you're prepared ahead of time. And this goes whether you're organic or conventional on which methods you're going to use for controlling a fire blight. So I have listed here those that are very susceptible, and so you can see that some of our very common apples are very susceptible. So when you look through this list, you see Fuji, Gala, the Jonathan. All of those listed there are very susceptible to fire blight, and for most people that are in commercial production, it is a common practice to use control methods to prevent spread. There are varieties that are susceptible, meaning that we don't have it every year, but when conditions are very conducive, it's not uncommon to see it. And so if you look in this list again, there's a couple of apple varieties that are very common, like the Golden Delicious and the Northern Spy, which, as I say, in a bad year, you would see fire blight in these types of apples as well. And I've got one that I would consider moderately susceptible, and that's one of the older ones, the Newtown Pippin. We also want to look at Vigor, and Vigor really will tie into rootstock selection when we get into rootstocks. We look at what the vigor of the scion is, or that's the part that's grafted onto their rootstock, and that's spelled S-C-I-O-N, so that's what we call the part that actually produces the fruit. We try to match that to the appropriate rootstock. And usually if we have a scion, the part that produces a fruit that is too low, it has very low vigor, usually what we have is excessive fruiting. And over time, fruit size declines. It starts moving more into that biennial bearing. And we also have a tree runt out and not fill the allotted space that we want. And so usually if we have a cultivar that is low in vigor, we try to match it up to a rootstock that has higher vigor to try and push it along. When we have a sign that is excessively vigorous, usually what we have happen is it's very vegetative. We have reduced flowering and fruiting on there. And it's also hard to contain the tree into the allotted space. And so that becomes problematic when they grow together or grow into each other. And so a lot of times this is where we move into using a more dwarfing clone like the M9 or the B9, or give it a greater planting distance. So again, this goes into the planning of your orchard to do a little background check on the cultivars that you're thinking about, to know ahead of time on whether it's considered to be a low vigor or whether it is excessive, so that you are getting it on the right rootstock or you're getting it with the right planting distance. When we look at apples that are considered to be low vigor, again, these would be ones that we would want to put on a rootstock that is vigorous. We would look at things like the Braeburn, Jonathan, the spur types like the Delicious and Golden Delicious, spur type Macintosh and Honeycrisp. All of those are notoriously low vigor, and when they're put on a low vigor rootstock, we see it have a tendency to come into cropping too soon, runt out, and not fill their space appropriately. So these we usually recommend that you put on a high vigor rootstock. So kind of keep that in mind when we get to the rootstock. I'll be talking about the vigor on the different rootstocks. When we talk about medium vigor, the famous Cox Orange Pippin, the regular Delicious, so I'm not talking spur, I'm talking about the regular one. Empires, Fuji's, Gala, you can see the list there. These are considered medium vigor. And those that are high vigor or very vigorous, these are the ones that we'd really be looking at putting on a more dwarfing rootstock or giving it more space to grow, would be things like Granny Smith, Rome Beauty, Mutsu, Macintosh. All of those are considered very high vigor. Now I include apple characteristics. They have their own growth habit too, and this kind of goes into helping you with pruning decisions. And the reason I put this slide on is particularly type 4 that I want to draw your attention to. I think most of you, if you're familiar with apples at all, are familiar with the spur type, and that's what I have pictured at the top in the color photo. Those are spur type apples, and you can match it up to the little drawing down below, number 1, where you can see a lot of the scaffold branches have a tendency to be low centered. It doesn't have the standard Christmas tree look to those. Those are most of the spur type will have this type of look to the tree. Type 2 has more branching than type 1, and so you see the Braeburn, John Gold, Northern Spy have that type of growth. When you look at number 3, it is more spreading with wider crotch angles, and it has much more frequent branching if you compare it to number 1 and number 2. And so those are our more traditional, like Golden Delicious. That's why a lot of time people that are very familiar with apples can make a good guess of what type of apple or what family of apples it is just by the growth type, because the trees somewhat have a remembered appearance. But it's type 4, as I said, that I want to draw your attention to. These are what we call tip bearers. Most apples produce on 2-year-old wood or older, but when we have type 4 types, they produce on 1-year-old wood, and we call these tip bearers. They have very narrow branch angles, very frequent branching. They have blind wood, and blind wood means that it's non-productive. There are no fruit buds on it, and that is a lot of the interior of the tree. They have a tendency to have kind of a sloppy, weeping habit. And Granny Smith is probably the most famous for this. Rome Beauty, Fuji, and Cortland also have this characteristic. But in terms of pruning, you need to be careful, because if you do a lot of shearing type of cuts or heading type cuts, you can cut off your crop. And so it's very important that you understand what their growth habit is as well when you go in to prune, or if you are large enough that you have a pruning crew that you properly train them, particularly for these type 4 tip bearers. Let's talk right on time, about halfway through. I need a little bit more time for rootstocks. Let's move into considerations for the rootstock. You know, a lot of people focus on, you know, the apple itself, and that's really important. But keep in mind that the rootstock is an apple cultivar itself. It has all of its own characteristics, all of its pluses and minuses for being a rootstock. And so it needs just as much consideration for long-term viability in either your backyard orchard or whether you're in commercial production is just as important. So just a little bit of terminology. I told you the scion is the part that is grafted, and you can see that spelled here. That is the part that is grafted onto the rootstock. The rootstock is the trunk and or the root material in which the buds or the scions are inserted. And usually that is a budding type of grafting procedure. Another word that I'll be using quite a bit is precocity. And this is how likely or how soon does something come into fruiting. And so when we say that a cultivar is highly precocious, that means that it is very quickly come into fruiting. And so something that has low precocity means that it takes the opposite, that it takes a long time. And so we usually, rootstock can affect that. And I'll say in general, the more dwarfing a rootstock is, the more precocious production you will have. So you can speed up production by putting something on a dwarfing rootstock. Now, some of the desirable rootstocks, when you're starting to look in catalogs and trying to decide what rootstock you're going to select, you need to look at long-term graft compatibility. And this is usually comes out from the larger commercial industry. When a new rootstock comes out over decades, you know, we get more and more information coming out on problems. And those are some of the reasons why we have lost some of our rootstocks, is because there have been long-term graft incompatibility problems. So we're looking for something that has a good track record in terms of graft compatibility across a lot of different cultivars. And so most of those I'm going to be talking about today have been around for hundreds of years, some for decades, and they usually have long-term graft compatibility, good record on that. Ability to control your scion vigor, we talked about that. And so when we talk about controlling it, sometimes we need to reduce it and sometimes we need to push it. And so you use your selection of rootstock for that as well. The ability to induce precociousness and maintain an abundant cropping. Again, the more as you get smaller and more dwarfing, it has a tendency to really speed up the precocity of the scion wood. I'm going to talk about a lot of freedom from suckering is something that most apple tree producers really want, and I'm going to be showing you a couple of rootstocks that are just, and one I actually said was annoying. It suckers so freely. And so when we talk about suckering, the main thing is in terms of management, because you actually have to do additional pruning with these types just to control suckering. This is an entry point for certain pests, whether it's borers or whether it's fire blight. We really want to have control of suckering, and some are way better than others. We're also looking for resistance and tolerance to both the biotic and the abiotic stresses. And so when we get to the point where I'm giving details about each one of the rootstocks, you'll see me mention several times on whether they're good for wet soils, whether they're good for dry soils, whether they are resistant to certain diseases and other pests. And so all of those are characteristics we want in a rootstock. I will say across the board, and I'm going to be giving a little more detail on this, is that when you have rootstock, you always want to make sure that it's coming from a supplier that can certify it as starting out as disease-free. So you don't want to get some rootstocks that are maybe already virus infected. You want to make sure that they're already free of virus, crown gall, and fire blight are probably the three big ones. And we have pretty good virus testing, disease testing in a lot of our nursery situations. But just a comment to make sure that you're looking for that. To give you a little bit of history of rootstocks, I want to say that in general, organized naming of rootstocks started in the early 1900s, although dwarfing rootstocks have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. But it was in the early 1900s that the East Malling Research Station gathered up all of the available rootstocks that were being used at the time and started sorting through them, testing them, and categorizing them. And so it was in the late 30s, in the early 1900s that they came out with a classification system. They came out with what are called Malling rootstocks, and there were 16 of them. Today, commercially, we have still using several of them. The M7, which is definitely in the dwarf area. M9, which is dwarf. I should say M7 semi-dwarf. M9 is dwarf. We also have M26 and M27, which came a little bit later. They had a breeding program in the mid-50s, which brought out the series of Malling Merton, which gave us the MM in front of several of these. And this breeding program was for woolly apple aphid resistance. And they released, I believe, 15 of those in the early 50s. And today we still have 106 and 111. And so far out of that program, the M7, historically we know that came from France and was bred around 1688. So literally it's been around for hundreds of years. It was known by several other names, but when Malling named it, it became Selection Malling 7, which we shortened to M7. The dwarf selection M9 was a chance seedling from the early 1800s. Again, it was known by several other names, and we still today, it is one of the most well-used dwarfing rootstocks today. The M26 is still very, very common. The M27 is a super dwarf, not as common. It's really considered a little bit too small for commercial production, but if you want a really, really little tree, M27 is still available in some nursery settings. And when we come to this program, the Malling program in the 50s through 70s, they worked together with the Long Ashton group and virus indexed all of the other Malling. And so when we look at M7, you saw a switch over to the EMLA category. So when you see EMLA 7, that means a Malling 7 rootstock that has been virus indexed, so it's virus free. And so that's kind of, when you're looking at rootstocks on what all the M's and all the EMLAs all came out of the East Malling Research Station with some collaboration with other groups. But all of these, the M's, the MM's, and the EMLAs are all Malling type of rootstocks. And I will be covering these in a lot more detail so that you can see the individual characteristics of them. So this is just a summary of what we've got. As I say, very dwarfing is the M27. Dwarfing, there are several clones of M9, and I'll go over some detail. And I mentioned I'm not going to go over the M9 Pajam number 2 because it has somewhat limited availability. So I won't go over anything that you might have trouble laying your hands on. The semi-dwarfing, a little bit larger trees, the 26, the 7, and the 106. Again, the 106 somewhat limited availability, more so, or I should say less so than the M9 Pajam. So if you look, you can find this. And then what we would consider a standard tree, just a small amount of dwarfing, would be the 111. Some of the other breeding programs that we have a lot of very much used rootstocks. Geneva is one of our newer breeding programs coming out of the USDA Cornell collaboration, and all of their rootstocks are the G series, so they have a G in front of their numbering system. And so you can see in the complete right-hand picture, this is a G30 rootstock. There's another breeding program in what would be called the former Soviet Union, and they have the Budgovsky series, or the Bud series, or B, and so they have a B in front of all their names. And so you can see a picture of a apple tree grafted onto a B9 rootstock in the left-hand picture. And so my point on this is that rootstocks can also affect branch angle. So in both of these pictures, I don't recall what the cultivar is, but it is the same cultivar, the same age of trees. The only thing that is different is that we have a B9 in the left hand, and we have a G30 rootstock on the right hand. And so if you look, you can see that there is a difference in branch angle. The G30 has a tendency to have a more open tree, wider branch angle compared to the B9, which is a more upright, tighter looking tree. And so that is one of the characteristics that you'll see listed for rootstocks is their effect on branch angle. Mike, I see your question here. I'm actually going to address this if you'll hold on. I will get to that at the end. Mike is asking about ordering from sources where they don't make it clear what the rootstock is. I'm actually going to address that, so just hold that question and we will get to it. So let's look at the individual rootstocks. So my goal here is to just kind of give you a baseline on which to compare each one of these. And what I've got a few in here that are a little bit newer. They're starting to be adopted by the commercial industry, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of detail. So when we're looking at an M27, and some of the retail nurseries, you know, if you're buying from Gurney's, still do use M27. This is a tree that is probably one of our smallest trees. It can be as much as half the size of an M9, so that could be putting it kind of in that size category of a 5 to 10 foot tall tree. It's usually considered too small for commercial production, but for a home landscape it would be perfectly fine. It is like all the malling rootstocks, sensitive to cold temperature, but it's similar to an M9. Usually we don't see that being a devastating effect throughout Illinois, but in a poor site there can be some cold hardiness. So I'll just leave it that these need to be in an area that is free of late frost as much as possible, so a more just a better site, a warmer site. It is resistant to burnouts, and I'm going to have a slide to show you burnout in a little bit, a little more detail on that, so just keep in mind that this is resistant. Resistant to root suckers, very precocious. So this means that anytime we're seeing a very precocious, you need to step in and make sure that you control cropping for probably the first 2 years, because you don't want to runt the tree out any more than necessary. So this is one that you'd really want to make a note to yourself because it is very precocious, that you want to make sure that you do not allow it to crop too soon, or it will runt out. It's less susceptible to fire blight than M9, but it still can get fire blight. G65 is one of the newer releases from the Geneva program, so I will say that it is still under evaluation from the commercial industry. It has been released, but it's so new that we're still getting information back from the commercial industry on how adapted it is. Comment, this is a patented tree, so there are patent fees for every rootstock that you buy, so there's a little bit of extra money associated with this. Again, very dwarfing. It's probably in between an M9 and the M27 that I just talked about. Very precocious and productive. It's resistant to fire blight, unlike the M9, resistant to cholera rot. For those of you who are on wet, heavy soils or soils that tend to hold on to water, this would be a good selection if you want a small tree. Moderately susceptible to woolly apple aphid, though, and it does have very good cold tolerance. And that's one of the things that you'll see with a lot of the Geneva rootstocks is that they were bred for improved cold tolerance and a lot of other issues as well. Still no magic bullet, but some of them may have some improvement over some of the mauling rootstocks. So this is the M9, and as I say, there are several clones. This is the first one. This is the 337 is probably the most commonly propagated clone. It is a virus-certified clone. Very precocious, produces a large tree. I want to make sure that you don't crop it too soon and run it out. It's tolerant of heavy soils. If you have it on light soils, though, you need to have irrigation. It has a limited root system for not only need for irrigation on light soils, but it also requires support. So everything we've talked about so far requires support. Fire blight susceptible. It's more prone to burnouts. Good availability on most varieties. So whether you're on the home market or whether you're on the commercial market, you should be able to access M9. This is a picture of fire blight on an M9 rootstock. You can see where the upper part of the tree may be completely resistant, but in this particular case, the rootstock was not, and it succumbed to fire blight, and the tree was lost. So that's why I say that when you're putting the two pieces together, you have to have consideration and management of both. So again, this is just like its other. This is a slightly more vigorous clone, and so this would be one that you would want to put something like Honeycrisp that has low vigor on. It has a more expansive and less brittle root system than M9, but it still needs to be supported. It's fire blight susceptible, just like all the other M9s, still prone to burnouts, and I will say that this is becoming more widely available. And so we've come into several of these less vigorous, particularly with the interest in Honeycrisp, of looking for a rootstock that has a little more vigor to it so that we can push it along more. G11 is another newer release that is still being evaluated. It's similar in size to an M9. It's susceptible to woolly apple aphid, but it has good fire blight resistance. It's also tolerant to cholera rot, has good cold hardiness, and I'll say that this one is available only on the most popular cultivars. It's probably not one you're going to see available in a lot of the home catalog situations. And so I have this picture in here to show you when we talked about these dwarf trees must be staked, to give you an idea of the size of a stake that we're usually suggesting when they're individually staked. And so here you can see one of them attached. Bud 9 is again similar in size to M9, not as big as the next size category of mauling, which is M26. This is very winter hardy, resistant to cholera rot, powdery mildew, apple scab. That's all good. Somewhat less susceptible to fire blight than M9. I've seen fire blight outbreaks in orchards, and all the M9s were just taken out, and B9 stood up. And so I definitely feel pretty good saying that it is less susceptible than M9. Still susceptible to woolly apple aphid, still needs support. It's not a producer of a lot of suckers and burnouts. Very precocious. This rootstock really has a history of runting out, particularly if we put one of those low vigor varieties on there. So we don't recommend low vigor on a lot of these bud 9s. It does well in most soils, and like the M9, if you put it on light soils, we do recommend irrigation. Very good availability on most varieties out there. This is one that a lot of the home catalogs will use as their dwarfing rootstock. So a lot of times you'll see them as being B9, M9, M27, and sometimes 26 as well when we get to that one. Okay, let's back up. Are we seeing suckers in this picture? No, you're not. I will show you a picture of suckers when we get up to the M7. What this picture is this plant has, those are actual roots, that this tree has been planted a little bit high because it was low budded to avoid sign rooting. And so if you get them, that graft union too close to the soil, the top can actually root itself and you lose all dwarfing effect on the rootstock. So this one was a little bit high set, and those couple little roots in that area aren't going to cause a problem. So you kind of see this when we have something that's budded too low. It's usually set a little bit high to avoid that sign rooting. Geneva 16 is also one of the new ones coming out of the New York program. These trees are in size between the M9 and an M26, so they're kind of in that 10 to 12 foot range. Very high yield efficiency, resistant to burnouts, resistant to root suckers, collar rot, strong resistance to fire blight. Oh man, this is just looking wonderful. Blah, blah, blah. You just keep going down. Everything is wonderful. And then you get to this bad one. It requires virus index cyan. It's very susceptible to latent viruses, and for that reason it's being dropped by many nurseries. And so here we have this really nice rootstock that seemed to just, you know, have everything going for it. It has this one fatal flaw that we'll probably see this disappear from the industry. So we have a lot of commercial growers that while they can still get things on G16, are doing so. And so right now it's probably limited to the most popular cultivars, and it's probably going to be expected to decrease in availability over time. And so I do want to mention that this is my slide to say that, you know, no matter what wonderful characteristic a rootstock has, if they are in any way problematic in the production, they have to be nursery friendly as well. And so we have some rootstocks that are just horrid in the nursery setting, and so those kind of have a tendency to disappear in favor of those that are easier to reproduce. Okay, this is the M26. This is one that will be probably another one of those that would be more readily available in the home market. This tree is between the M9 and the next grade up, the M7, so it's around a 12-foot tree. It is probably the most hardy of the entire malling series. It requires staking. I'm going to say this on less fertile soil. And what happens if you have kind of marginal soils, it starts leaning on you. So if you can support maybe for the first 5 years or so, it will become self-supporting. But I usually laugh about that. Once you've supplied that level of support for that many years, no one's going to take the support out. So I usually just tell people, if you have marginal soils, support this tree. You also, one of the things that you can do is sacrifice some of your early crop early on, because this is fairly precocious. You might want to take the crop off for maybe the first 4 years or so just to put resources into that root system and developing a self-supporting tree. So that's another option that you can go as well. So as I mentioned, this is very precocious, and you really do have to control early fruiting, at the very least the first 2 years. It does not tolerate wet soils or poorly drawing. Even though it's moderately resistant to cholera rot, it just does not do well in poorly drained soil. It is notorious for runting out on droughty soils, so it does need irrigation, or you're going to get a much smaller tree. Fire blight susceptible, also woolly apple aphid susceptible. Here I have a picture of burnout in the lower picture, and the reason that we're concerned about burnouts and not wanting them is that these are actually root initials, and this becomes that entry point for some of the pests that we don't want. Those are like your different borers, the dogwood borers, the plum borers. Also the woolly apple aphid that not only forms colonies in the canopy of the tree, but it also can colonize in the root system. And it's the root system that causes so much damage on young trees. It's also an entry point for fire blight and some of the wood rotting fungi. So again, this is something that if we can get a rootstock that doesn't promote this, that's one of the things we want to look for. This is readily available on almost all cultivars. So again, this is even a rootstock that's used by a lot of the home orchard suppliers as well. G30 is one that is a new one, another newer release from Geneva. It's similar in size to an M7, which I'm going to be talking about fairly soon, but it is much, much more precocious. M7, as I get to it, is not known for its precocity or its production. This rootstock's resistant to fire blight. It is prone to some suckering and burnouts. And when you have cultivars that are considered brittle, and that would be something like Gala, you can see breakage. And I've got a picture of a brittle graft union here. So the tree will just absolutely just snap off. Even if they're staked in or trellised, with any movement of the tree, you can see snapping. Woolly apple aphid susceptible. It's cholera rot resistant. It has improved cold hardiness. It does have nursery problems, though. It's difficult to produce. So again, this one's probably going to move into that limited availability, and as soon as they find something better, it probably will be replaced. Okay, you ask about, are we seeing suckers? We are seeing suckers. And so M7 is notorious for heavy suckering, and this is something that, again, is entry point for a lot of pests. Most notable is fire blight. And M7 is somewhat susceptible to fire blight. And so with all these root suckers, with all that new tender growth, a very good entry point for fire blight into your root system. So it is not desirable at all. This is a fairly good sized tree, around peach tree size. So again, it's between the M26 and the next size group, which is 106. So it's about a 15-foot tall tree. Very open, spreading growth habit. It has a very poor history of anchorage. So this is a tree that is a leaner as well. It has very frost-sensitive roots and potassium uptake problems. And so this one, again, even though it's considered semi-dwarf, it should be staked and or trellised for the life of the tree. Staking should be sufficient. Very hardy. Better performance on dry sites. I will say that it's not the best on heavy soil. It has what I call annoying root suckers, and when you can get away with it and avoid sign rooting, plant it a little deeper to reduce that, but sometimes you don't have that much leeway between the graft union. And so a lot of times on M7, nurseries will bud them higher than normal just so you can plant them a little bit deeper. Definitely, in addition to suckers, it forms burnouts as well. And I want to say overall, this is not the best producer of the rootstocks we've looked at. M106, this is getting to be a bigger and bigger tree, 18 feet, bigger, depending on your soil and cultivar. So the better your soil is, the more productive or vigorous your cultivar is, the bigger the tree. So you can get a couple of feet more on better soil. It's much better anchored than a 7. It's fire blight susceptible, doesn't root sucker. It does get burnouts though. It's kind of touchy about soil moisture. It's kind of like the 3 bears, not too hot, not too cold, just right. This is not too wet, not too dry, just right. So it does do better on a well-drained, drier site than it does a heavy, wet soil. And I will make a comment that though this is, part of the woolly apple aphid breeding program from Malling, it's still not immune. So it can run into aphid problems. On the market, commercial market, I would categorize this as somewhat limited in availability on what varieties are available on it. M111, I would say that this is a very, very common large tree. Even though this does have a small amount of dwarfing in them, this is what we would consider a standard tree. It's about 22 feet, very vigorous, it's well anchored, it's resistant to collar rot, good for wet, heavy soils. It's not as vigorous on sandy soils though, so you'd probably want to put irrigation to this on a sandy soil. It's resistant to woolly apple aphid, good availability on many cultivars, and its few suckers. So this is one of those trees that has everything going for it except for it's too big. If we could get this tree in dwarf, that would be good, but this is a very good tree, just big. And so in looking at those, we've got one more still here, and that's the Bud 118. This is, I will say, one of the newer releases. It's still under evaluation in the commercial industry. It's similar in size to that 106 and 111 area, depending on what soil types, how big it is. It is very winter hardy. Adapted to a wide range of soil like 111, resistant collar rot, very precocious like 106. And remember I told you that when we have something very precocious, we want to really look at controlling the fruiting so we don't runt the tree out. Well, we actually have some commercial growers that are experimenting with this rootstock to purposefully early crop it to try to runt this down into more of a semi-dwarf size. And so this is something that they're just looking at. We don't have good reports back on it, but that again drives home how much you can potentially run a tree out by cropping it too soon. We have gotten some reports back of it being a leaner, and so this might need to have some level of anchorage. Don't have it coming from the entire industry yet, so that's still, I've got a lot of question marks on whether that's really an issue, because it does have a very well developed root system, and so getting reports that it's a tipper leaner, we'll just kind of leave that as a little side note for right now. It is becoming more widely available in the market as well. One oddity that I will mention that you can find, probably not in the home market, but definitely on a commercial market or someone who does custom budding, is getting an interstem. And what you do is take a rootstock, something like a 111, as the root system, then graft on an M9 as the interstem, and then on top of the M9 put your signwood. And so what this gives you is the anchorage and the soil, disease resistance and other, characteristics that you like for the root system, but you get the dwarfing effect of the interstem. And then you can put your crop on top of it. This is more expensive because it is a double graft and takes longer in the nursery as well. Very limited availability as well. A lot of times this would be a custom graft. Some of the commercial industries where you're buying wholesale have this on an option with some of the cultivars. So when we look at rootstocks, I'm not going to go into great detail about this right now, but I did want to point out that your planting space does change with rootstocks, and I'm just giving you kind of a general concept of what the spacing would be. If you have spur types, usually those can be planted closer because they don't grow as large as a standard, standard cultivar. If you have vigorous growing types, something like Granny Smith, you need to give it a little bit more space. So these are just kind of some general spacing. And then as giving you an example, if you get into whether you're planting, what would be considered low density, medium density, high density, this is just an example of how that would change using a given rootstock. So if you look at M9, we would never, it's such a small rootstock, we would never plant it at low density, but we could plant it at medium or high, and you can see how that spacing changes with that. Fred, I see your question. Is the biennial effect seen tree by tree, or is it orchard wide? I've seen it both ways, but it's more towards orchard wise. But you can have individual trees that are off sequence to the other ones. But in general, it can be orchard wide if there's enough trees. When you're buying, so let's get into some of the buying. Hopefully I'll get through this so you can move on. When we're looking, the ideal size for a whip are the 1/2 inch to 5/8 inch diameter. That usually will give you a tree 4 to 6 feet tall. If you can't get that, the next size you want to go is to go down, not large. The only time I would go larger, and that's to the 5/8 to 3/4 inch, is if you're planting a high-density orchard and you are going for feathered trees. Feathered trees means that they are branched. When you're buying whips, they are unbranched. And so the only time you'd buy big is if you're going for high density and you want feathered trees. Let's kind of move into what Mike was asking about purchasing these things. When you're buying retail, the identity of the rootstock's not always obvious on the tag. And so these 3 tags that I have here were all on the same tree. So there were 3 tags. So you look at the top tag, it's this is a tag that the nursery, the grower put on it. So this is just the cultivar tag. And on the flip side of it, all it has is very general planting instruction, nothing about providing support. But if you look at the tag, you see that it's dwarf. So that kind of tells you, now that you're in the know, that if it says dwarf, you need to have some sort of, staking or trellis system. The next tag down, this came from the grower of the tree. So this came directly from the nursery, not the retail outlet. And this is the tag that actually has what the rootstock is. And if you weren't apprised earlier, that M27 might not have meant anything to you. And now that you've listened to this, you now know that M27 is one of the smallest rootstocks. So this is a very small tree. And then the next, the green tag, is the one, the nursery where the tree was retail sold. And so again, that tag just kind of gives information on who's selling it and what the cultivar is. So all you have made available to you is that M27. That's it. And the top tag tells you what the ultimate height is. Now, on this one, I think it's a little bit misleading because they suggest that this tree gets 10 foot tall. That would only be if you have it on the most productive soil, so it easily could only reach 5 foot tall. So that's one of the problems with retail, is that there's a lack of information of what is on the what the tree is. So when you're looking at trees in a garden center, look at all of the tags and see if you can identify that little area where I've circled on where they have told you what the rootstock is. It's usually somewhere. Now this is a tag off of a tree that was ordered from one of the catalogs. And so again, retail catalogs rarely mention rootstocks specifically. And so I recently looked to see what Gurney's did, and they call their standard, their semi-dwarf trees standard. Their dwarf trees they call little big. Stark Brothers just uses the term semi-dwarf and dwarf. They don't actually tell you what the rootstock is. And so what I tell people who are buying from catalogs is that they call customer service and have them identify what rootstocks they're using. And so in this particular tag here, this Pixie Crunch, if you look at it, you can see that it was grafted onto a Bud 9 rootstock, and it tells what the caliper is too, 3/15. So it's a Bud 9. Now I know for a fact that Gardens Alive, who markets through Gurney's and several other companies as well, they don't always use Bud 9. I believe they're using B27 this year. And so it is important that you call every time to see what rootstock they are selling on before you purchase, because as you've seen, they all have completely different characteristics on them. You also have the option of grafting your own as well. And so I've got a resource here of just two. There are more, but here are two of that if you want to buy some rootstocks. The only drawback in this particular case is you got to get together with a bunch of your buddies, because for the most part, the minimum order for some of the smaller rootstocks is 100, and for the larger rootstocks it's 50. So you'd have to kind of get in with your buddies to split an order. But Trico and Lawyer both are rootstock nurseries where you can just buy the rootstocks and do your grafting on your own if you want to do something like that. There are also companies that will do custom grafting and sell in small quantities. They also sell to the commercial industry, but they have a little sideline where they sell smaller quantities. And so I have some contacts here. For example, Grandpa's Orchard does custom grafting, and they sell small quantities of trees. And so the other half of this is Mosier's tree fruit sales, which that's a wholesale component of Grandpa's that only sells large quantities. Cummins Nursery also does custom grafting and sells in small quantities. The owner of the company, his father, Jim Cummins, was the original breeder of the Geneva rootstock. So they have a direct connection to the rootstock and have a good understanding of rootstocks, having Dr. Cummins in the family business there. So those are some of the examples of options that you have. At this point, I'll open it up to any additional questions. Does a cold period, as in winter, induce apples to bud? With apples, flower induction usually occurs a few weeks, 4 to 6 weeks after bloom, and then it is later in the fall when they actually develop. So a cold period is needed for fruitfulness, but the actual development occurs the previous year. Okay, if you have a Honeycrisp on M26, can you still plant them 4 to 8 feet apart, or is that too close? That's probably running a little bit close, but Honeycrisp is not that vigorous, and so if you crop them fairly early, you might be able to hold them in their space on there. But definitely 4 foot is going to be a real serious challenge. I'd probably push it closer to the 8 feet on that one. Question, I was told to plant crabapple as a pollinator. Yes, crabapples. There are crabapples that are very suited to be pollinators for apple crops. In fact, there are crabapple rootstocks for apples as well. There's more of a chance of incompatibility problems, but it is quite common for crabapples to be used. But they are just like any other apple. used for pollinator, they have to have bloom overlap. So as long as you have a crabapple that has the same bloom period, it will work as well. What would happen if you graft a Granny Smith apple to a Gala apple? You would have a branch of Granny Smith on your Gala. It's very common if you go to a catalog like Stark Brothers. Well, I don't know if Stark Brothers, but you've probably seen some tree fruit catalogs where they have like multiple varieties, and that is what they have done. Is that they'll have a rootstock and they'll have some base plant, let's just say Granny Smith. Did I cover Geneva 41? No, I didn't specifically cover Geneva 41, and the main reason that I didn't was it's not reliably available yet. It's so new. It's another one of the Geneva rootstocks that has a lot of good qualities on it, and I can email you later details on it if you'd like to have it. But again, it's not readily available at this point. It's new enough. But it does have several good qualities on it, like the good winter hardiness and so forth. Any other additional questions? I will tell you, for people that are interested in rootstocks, you can go to the e-extension page for Apple rootstocks, the NC 140 trials, where they're doing field trials of all the different rootstocks, and all the results are located there as well. So if you want to, look at that, that would be a really good source. Can I recommend a really good place for pruning of the trees? Penn State has made some really nice videos, and so has North Carolina. If you go to YouTube and do a search on apple pruning, anything that's coming out of North Carolina, Pennsylvania, their tree fruit specialists have done a good job of talking about pruning techniques there. For those of you who are ready to go, I thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure. You see my email there if you have some additional questions that I can help you with. I'd be glad to. Again, thank you all, and have a good rest of your day and upcoming weekend.